So the idea today is to go over the advanced applied neuroscience perspective of how to overcome resistance. When we think about resistance, just this word resistance, we all define it differently. And from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, when we say resistance, we mean something very specific that tends to be different than how we use it in general or traditionally. It's really how we interact with our emotional discomfort. So we're going to talk about that, what we mean by resistance. And once we identify what that is, it will also allow us to talk very differently about how to overcome resistance. So we're going to talk about that a lot. But before we do, just to tell you what we're going to cover today, we're going to capture some initial thoughts from the workbook. We're going to go back. If you had a chance to do the workbook, great. If you haven't, had a chance to go over it, I will send it. I can send it to you after this session, and it's just as good as a review for you to go back and kind of process what we've talked about today. So if you haven't had a chance to go over it, no worries. But if you have, we're going to incorporate some of that early on, and I would love to capture some of your initial thoughts. Then we're going to do a quick breakout room and explore where the advanced applied neuroscience definition of resistance meets with you, with your experience. Then we're going to go over 7 very, very important advanced applied neuroscience takeaways in the context of resistance. We'll come back and we'll discuss what you can do differently right now as you're working with your coaching clients. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Just a couple more things I want to mention before we dive in. First off, if you have any resources, so if there's a great book recommendation or a reference or anything from your rich experience that you're willing to share, please share it in the chat, other than the sections that I will open for discussion. Everyone around this room is an experienced coach, so it's always valuable for me not to lose these things. And the second thing I wanted to say is just a shout out. Over the years, I've trained and certified close to 200 executive and life coaches. So some of them are here today. Some of them have taken just the foundations program. Some have, completed the whole certification. So just to say thank you for being here. I know you don't need this additional knowledge. You already know this information. So being here and supporting me and building this community means a lot to me. So thank you. Okay, and they may tell you when you're in the breakout room, they may tell you, I'm taking the program now, or I've been certified, and so on. It's just a great resource. So here, first question for you in the chat. What is your personal definition of resistance? How do you define resistance from your experience? Thank you for sharing of your experience and your own definition. So hold on to that. A lot of you are going to find that your definitions are very close already to what advanced applied neuroscience suggests, which is wonderful. So wonderful. We're going to get it more honed in and talk about what we can do about it. But before we do, I just going to tell you like a really quick note about where the advanced applied neuroscience definition comes from. So first off, advanced applied neuroscience is a discipline that combines 3 main fields: the neuroscience of threat, the neuroscience of emotion, and the neuroscience of transformation. And I like to think about them as giants. And in my mind's eye, I see them kind of sitting in the woods around the fire, chatting and bringing their own richness. They're all, each one of them is a unique source of knowledge. Then when they come together, when the neuroscience of threat and the neuroscience of emotion and the neuroscience of transformation come together and they start talking to one another and they start exploring, what do they share? What are their kind of the tension between the different fields? And this dialogue produces understandings that you wouldn't have just by looking at one of them individually. And resistance is smack at the heart of this discussion. Resistance is really something that you can only understand when you hear the dialogue of all 3. The understanding of resistance requires the discussion of all 3, but even more importantly, how to overcome resistance. It is absolutely essential to hear the dialogue between those 3. So that's really, really important to understand, and it's gonna follow us throughout our time together today. So with that in mind, I do want to discuss any insights that came up for you from the workbook. Any insight that you had, any questions that came up for you, anything that met with your experience and you resonated with, anything that just felt like, no, I don't know about that. Any thoughts at all are very welcome.
Okay, so from the workbook, the BNST road, what I found interesting when you ask the question, what does it mean that, we derive emotional discomfort could come from things that come from past experience or meaning that we were given past experiences. So to me, the big aha or the big takeaway is that even if it's a current state event or something that's resisting, we're always coming at it from our past, right? And so if we're spinning in that, it means that transformation must be that much more difficult because you really need to kind of disentangle yourself from the past that can be buried into so many deep layers, but that kind of grasp of the past on us, even in the little kind of responses to discomfort, can be huge, and we can often miss them and not see them
Mm,
in coaching for sure. So that's one of the
mm.
pieces in the workbook that kind of jumped out at me.
Thank you. And just to piggyback on that a little bit, two quick things to say. First, in I don't know, I originally come from organizational change, and the language there, I guess not just the language there. We say we're resisting change, right? The term is resistance to change. And actually, from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, the change has nothing to do with it. We're not resisting change. We're resisting our past patterns. The past patterns are the ones that are igniting the resistance, not the change that's coming, in the future or the thing. So that's a really, really important distinction, just to piggyback on what you said there. And then the second thing is that not only are they entangled like that, and then it's hard to untangle, which it is. This is, we say that this is advanced applied neuroscience focuses on difficult change because this is one of the most difficult things to change in the brain. I'll get to that a little later. But not only is it entangled, but also our clients made sense of it in ways that are not always actually, they don't always see the entanglement correctly. So when we talk to them about what's getting in the way, and this has to do with using the prefrontal cortex or using the limbic system, I don't want to get into it too much, but um, the way the client themselves talk about it is a lot of times the way their prefrontal cortex made sense of the entanglement, not actually what's going on. So now we have like like a complex challenge. It's even more complex than that. We'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to reinforce. Thank you so much.
Several things came up, but what you were saying about we're not resisting change, we're resisting past patterns. I wonder how much of it is either resisting past patterns that we don't want or resisting making new patterns. That came up for me. I wondered how much of BNST work is surfacing what is less conscious, like the
Mm,
entanglements. And then the two thoughts I wrote down when I read this a couple of weeks ago, and I can't exactly remember what inspired them, but one is the concept of inspiring permission with the coachee simply to open the door to exploring change itself with them.
thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I also really appreciated the broadening of the perspective about threat and the ways that different parts of the brain come together to create this complex reaction. And
Mm,
it's not just sort of a physical or in front of your face threat, but also that uncertainty can play a big role in resistance.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let's define resistance, shall we? So from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, resistance is an ineffective or even dysfunctional response pattern to emotional discomfort. Two things about that. First, when we say emotional discomfort, we just mean lower degree threat. Okay, so kind of where we mapped it, we're not talking about threat that activates fight, flight, freeze responses. We're talking about emotional discomfort, meaning lower degree threat, below the threshold. And by the word dysfunctional, I don't mean, kind of a therapeutic diagnosis. I mean that it is not functional. And not only is it not functional, it actually can intensify our experience of the threat. Rather than soothing the threat, rather than calming us and making us feel empowered and increase our sense of agency and all that stuff, rather than doing that, it's actually going to make us feel less safe over time. This generates all kinds of thinking patterns, behavioral patterns, ways of responding, acting, reacting that block us. As a result, it's going to make us get in our own way of being able to achieve what we want, actually, what we genuinely want. This is going to get in our way. That's what advanced applied neuroscience means when we're saying resistance. So that's the advanced applied neuroscience definition of resistance is the first takeaway for us. What we're going to do is we're going to move into a breakout room. And what I invite you to discuss in the breakout rooms is just to think about when people get in their own way, when they say they want to change, they genuinely want to transform, say they want to start a business, now they feel some kind of emotional discomfort. How are they reacting? How are they behaving? What I'd like to invite you to do is try to recall like an example or a specific case study when you're working with a client. What are some of the thinking patterns, the behaviors, or the reactions that block them from achieving what they genuinely want? Also, there are multiple people here who have taken the Foundations program and done the certification in the past. So if you happen to be in a room with two of them, all of a sudden one of them is going to disappear and move into a different room. Please forgive me, everyone involved, for the inconvenience involved in that. What came up for you guys, if you don't mind sharing?
I'll just throw out from our group feeling of victimization, being victimized. It's not my thing to change. It's being forced on me.
What came up in our group was how badly does somebody really want something if they're not prioritizing what their stated desire is or stated outcome is. So not to get too into the situation, but if a client says, I want this, well, what's getting in their way? All of these other priorities continue to 1, 2, and 3, and this is the one that gets to the back burner.
Just to build on that, whole idea of motivation and resistance being very different things. So we talked about, somebody says they want to do this, but then they show up and don't do the work. You could be very motivated to want to change and realize you need to, but the resistance, may come into play then because it's frightening. There's a subconscious reason why you're not doing it. And we need to recognize the difference between those things to help them break through it.
Thank you. And this is going to become really, really important, that distinction. We can desperately want to change, and still be stuck because our deep emotional reactions to emotional discomfort are not serving us. We'll get to it in a moment, what to do about it. I think this is a very, very important distinction. Let me kind of stop us here in terms of the discussion real quick. Feel free, if there's additional things that came up in your groups and you'd like to share it in the chat, please feel free to do that. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to just complete those 7 takeaways, and then I'm going to go relatively quickly, and then we'll process. So the first thing was the definition of resistance. The second is that there are 2 domains, not one, in the brain. We're used to thinking about threat as a one domain kingdom, thinking about the amygdala and the fight, flight, freeze. And there's a lot of implications in coaching that come from that assumption. There's actually two domains, and the way those domains are split is that the amygdala is in charge of imminent and immediate threat, short-lived threat that is happening right now in this minute. Everything else, all the uncertainty and ambiguity related threat actually is related to the BNST. And this is important because they don't work the same way. And so some of the assumptions that we've made about how resistance works, because we assumed that resistance comes from the amygdala, actually should be reevaluated because they're not coming from the amygdala, they're coming from the BNST, and the BNST works differently. Okay, so that's really important to understand. The third takeaway is that our reactions to threat on the amygdala are factory installed, meaning they've been refined by thousands of years of human existence. You're born with them. So if you're reacting with a fight, flight, freeze response, you're not resisting. From a neuroscience perspective, that's not a thing. There's no way an amygdala reaction can be dysfunctional. It can be misidentified. I can, like, for example, if I've been stung by a bee and had a very dramatic allergic reaction, and I'm about to step outside and I hear some kind of a buzz that's not a bee, I don't know, maybe it's a saw, or something. I can be instantaneously activated. I didn't actually see a bee, but I perceived that the threat of the bee might be nearby. And then I can misidentify the threat. So that can be ineffective, if you will. But the minute the threat is actually identified or perceived to be identified, the reaction that follows is always functional. It's supposed to protect you. And because it's supposed to protect you, it's functional. And if it's functional, it's not resistance. That's not true for the BNST. You're going to see that in a moment. The fourth one, and this is very, very important, is that the input sources that go into the amygdala and the input sources that are going into the BNST are different. The amygdala gets input from sensory centers. So both from the thalamus just brings all the information from the body directly. And then the amygdala reacts. I'm not going to get into all how the amygdala reacts, but it takes sensory information from the body and then the cortical layer in the brain. So that's the outer layer of the brain. That's where some of our sensory processing in the brain lives. It gets all the information from there and it reacts really, really quickly. And the idea is for it to be fast, protective, and then short-lived. The reactions of the amygdala don't stay. So if you're noticing anything that has to do with anxiety or kind of long-term, or obviously anything projected into the future, the amygdala can then defer it to the BNST to take over. The BNST, on the other hand, is getting its input from sources that are related to experience and to meaning making. So the insular cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus there's just three examples. Look how central these little parts are, and that gives them an opportunity to be connected to a lot of different sources. They're also connected to one another. And so for the fifth takeaway is really to understand that all of the sources that the BNST draws on, they're experience-based and they're meaning-making related. So obviously the prefrontal cortex, the insular cortex, and the hippocampus, they have other roles except for the ones written here, but they're all experience-based. So the insular cortex takes our felt experiences in the body and it makes meaning from that. The hippocampus draws, what's happening, and then it compares it to our experience-related memories, and each one of them has very important roles related to meaning making and understanding how to use our past experience to react to threat in the world. So this is heavily experience and meaning making based. What's important to understand is that the sources of information that the BNST uses in order to formulate what it considers threat, and also, as you'll soon see, how to react to threat, they're all coming from experience. And because they're coming from experience, they're constructed. We construct them individually. We're not born with them. We're not, unlike the amygdala where you're born with them. This is constructed through your life. You build it and you can rebuild it. You learn it and you can unlearn it. And what is as important is to understand that on the BNST in particular, not only what we consider threat is designed by experience, but how we react to threat is also designed by experience. So let me say this, let me just take a moment and say this in a slightly different way. Just like there are fight, flight, and freeze responses in the brain, there are also other reactions to threat that exist on the BNST. Those are self-constructed. You are building them yourself, okay? And you learn from your experience and you build them, but they're not as strong in like intensity as the fight, flight, freeze responses, but they are very powerful patterns. They are reinforced by the time we meet coaching clients as adults. They are reinforced, I don't know, millions of times, and they have two components in them. They have emotion and they have threat. And because they have emotion and threat, these patterns become like they're like stuck like with super glue. Now, there are things you can do to release super glue, to release the adhesive, but it's not just any regular glue, okay? They're very powerfully reinforced in the brain. And just to give you a sense of what some of these patterns are, you actually said some of them in your discussion, so I'm sure this will sound familiar. When we talk about any kind of self-dismissal patterns or any kind of control patterns or any kind of one-sidedness or pleasing or shifting into optimism, and these are just a few examples. So the sixth takeaway is these patterns. To date, we have identified 27 of these patterns that are, like I said, think fight, flight, freeze on the amygdala, except these are the equivalent patterns below the threshold on the BNST. So when I meet with threat, I may overvalue control. I may overvalue one-sidedness. I may overvalue or undervalue pleasing, whatever. All of these can be overvalued or undervalued. I may switch very quickly to optimism. I will start imposing on myself. All these patterns are the equivalent of threat responses on the amygdala, except here they are self-constructed. The thing to understand here is that unless I had a really great role model growing up, and usually our role models are our parents or teachers at school or wherever else at a young age, and often they themselves weren't taught how to construct their BNST road. And typically, because we don't have good role models, because they themselves didn't have role models, when a threat comes through and I'm worried about something, or I'm anxious about something, or the uncertainty of something feels threatening to me, rather than the uncertainty or the threat coming in and me processing it in a way that allows me to work through it quickly and pass it on, instead I get on a really, really bumpy road and I get stuck. This is where we get stuck. Within the way we interact with our own emotional discomfort, that's where we get stuck. And this is what's causing resistance from an advanced applied neuroscience point of view. And then this is the final takeaway for you. This is more just for your own reflection, because when we think about threat, we tend to think about how external things are threatening us. You know, my relationship with my husband, who's judgmental, my dad, who raised me a certain way. I don't know, I have all these priorities, I'm overwhelmed. There's all these things happening outside of me. But I want to invite you to consider what happens when I actually believe that my own unpleasant emotions are threatening to me and I want to avoid them. Now what? Now what happens? It's really interesting to understand that sometimes we develop a relationship with our own unpleasant emotions, like feeling hurt, feeling insecure, feeling angry, right? Feeling shame, all those emotions. If we develop a ineffective relationship, or I don't know what to call it, but not a productive relationship with our unpleasant emotions, we can start treating our own emotions as threat. And then we want to avoid our own unpleasant emotions. So that also can become a threat source. And I just want to leave you with a couple of things. First off is to repave the BNST road takes more than just understanding threat. You have to understand all three of those giants and how they operate and dialogue with one another. Otherwise, it's very hard. Those patterns on the BNST road, they're not as unchangeable as the patterns on the amygdala, which are just they're built in, they're unchangeable. Okay, so patterns on the BNST road can be unlearned, but these patterns have been evolved over, typically by the time we meet our clients, they've been evolved for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So that reinforcement in itself is powerful. And in addition to that, they are the stickiest of all because they're related both to emotion and to threat. And both of those components, they create like a super glue effect in the brain. It is a demanding task, and we're not going to obviously be able to cover all of this in, an hour of discussion. That was not my aim. I just wanted to introduce you to the topic and maybe start a shift in thinking about how we engage with resistance. But I just wanted to leave you with a very practical thing you can start doing right now. A lot of our work with our coaching clients is around having a conversation around the narrative of what's going on, right? What's going on with my husband? What's going on at work? What's hard for me? What do I want to change? How can I change this thing that's in my way? Like we have a lot of narrative conversations. I want to invite you just to do one thing, to start looking at the interaction with a different lens and start wondering, how is this individual interacting with emotional discomfort? How is this individual interacting with emotional discomfort? And maybe invite a conversation to start discussing that. Start talking about how we can change the way we interact with emotional discomfort. Because if you address that, and if you change that, I'm not saying it's easy. Like I said, it's good to have all three giants on your side. But even if you don't have them yet, just opening this conversation and starting to look at it and using the skills you already have as an experienced coach, just with a different lens, can make a really, really, really big difference. If you had to go do one thing differently today, if you had to go out, if you have to jump off right now and you want one thing to do differently, is to really distinguish between the narrative that you're having a conversation with the client about, what the narrative is, to separate that from how they're interacting with emotional discomfort. Once you start really, really honing in on those patterns and changing them, by changing the way people interact with emotional discomfort, everything changes. Everything changes. So that's my invitation for you for today. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Any thoughts, just to see where you're sitting with all of this after now we've covered the content?
Hi, Ruth, if I may, and thank you for this session. As I work in different type of methodologies, I blend coactive coaching with systemic, with somatic, and then I see where the client is, of course, and we go in different directions. So I was wondering, do you have any perspective in terms of using that neuroscientific approach? And for example, other methods like the parts work, the internal family systems. Do you have any insight on that?
Like in terms of how they work together?
Yes.
Or how they compare. So, well, there's a lot of insights because there's a lot of different aspects. Like if you ask me now about somatic, how does it work with somatic work? I would have a different answer than if you ask me how does it work with parts work, right? So I could talk about any one of them. But just in general, so all of these things are very important. And advanced applied neuroscience isn't here to say we are covering the whole map, and you don't need any other technique. Just do this and don't do anything else. No, the idea is it's called Advanced Applied Neuroscience. In all cases, the people who do our certifications program or our foundations program, they're all experienced coaches. So they're all bringing already the richness of what they know and the previous methodologies and so on. So it's not meant to substitute any other methodologies. That's important to understand. You still need to learn somatic experience. You still benefit from parts work and other things. The huge contribution of advanced applied neuroscience is really the understanding of how to navigate threat in general, and in particular, how to navigate emotional discomfort. And parts work, I think one of the things that's really wonderful about it, there's an underlying acceptance, compassion and acceptance, but more the acceptance for me being able to say, okay, I see my parts. And I accept them in. They're all welcome. They're all part of me. I can keep working, on them. I can have them dialogue with each other. There's things I can do with my parts. They're not stagnant, but I'm not running away from my parts anymore. I can hold them. That ability is hugely beneficial, not just for parts work, but as a foundation for transformation, period. In another way, what am I saying? I'm saying that from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, what you're actually doing that is most important from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, what you're doing that is most important is that you're creating this acceptance. And the acceptance is a jumping board for everything else you want to work on. If a client comes in to advanced applied neuroscience and they don't have that capacity to contain, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance and self-forgiveness is going to be one of the first things on the report, and they're going to need to work on that. And we have a different way of working on it. Doesn't matter. We're aiming for the same thing. And, ironically, I mean, if you think about it really, about the techniques of what you're using, they're using the same underlying neuroscience principles, which is why it works. All I'm saying is it's hugely beneficial and hugely relevant, and it's very complementary. Like there are methodologies where people come in and ask to take the foundation. I know you didn't ask about this, but if you're curious, there are methodologies that people come in and I'll be like, oh, wait for a moment at the door. Let's talk about this because you may really, really not like this program. It's really going to clash with what you know about how to navigate coaching. Parts work is an easy, very natural fit because parts work and advanced applied neuroscience are using the same underlying, whether you talk about it in parts work or not, we're using the same neuroscience knowledge. One example where it clashes, if you guys are interested, is there are methodologies that are very focused on not creating any threat in the coaching process and on cognitive exploration that leads to insight, because it's more like therapy discussion. It's more like, what do you think? Like, why do you think you feel like that? The second you say, why do you think you feel like that, you're inviting the prefrontal cortex to be the one in charge, right? So there's a clash there.
Right, you bring this example because in our group we were exactly talking about that disconnection from emotion body, and that how difficult it is to overcome when someone says, I think, I feel. So it's very kind of significant.
And for us, it's very, very important from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective to bypass that. What your conscious mind knows about you is important. Like it's input, but it's secondary to what your limbic system actually believes about the world, because that's the system that reacts to emotional discomfort. And so you can say, no, I'm going to be I'm going to be very composed next time. Or, next time I feel depressed, I'm going to remind myself of uplifting things. Guess what? That's not, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's not going to resolve your patterns.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the wisdom you share.
Thank you for being here. Any other thoughts, insights, anything you'd like to share, guys? You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And for me, it was the first time I hear of BSNT, honestly. So that was amazing. It gives a different perspective of how we work. So my question would be around tools, and maybe that's also quite a big question, and probably there is a program around it, but more on a bigger scale, on a big picture, because I heard you mention also, safety, and that's usually, like what I've heard, not what I've heard, but what we work with, you make clients feel safe to go deeper into the change. So is there, do you have a different approach?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So, listen, transformation is a very complex function in the brain. It's very demanding of many parts to work together. And when you kick into high intensity threat, for functional reasons, your brain stops being integrated. So the different parts of the brain stop talking to each other fluently. And that's going to block transformation. So if you ask me, are you in agreement that we need to keep the client safe enough so they don't kick into fight, flight, freeze mode? I would say most definitely, most absolutely definitely. But that's the thing, is that originally, when we designed coaching and change facilitation models, we depended on the understanding of the amygdala. And the amygdala is most famous for being kicked into fight, flight, freeze mode. So the way we thought about it was there's either fight, flight, freeze, or there's safe, which is, by the way, not true either, but that's besides the point. So because we designed it with the amygdala in mind, we said, well, keep it safe, keep it there's only risk, like there's only threat or safe. So because that's the only two options, then safe it is, right? So now we're trying to keep them safe so they don't kick into. But once you really understand that, obviously we want to keep it safe enough. Yes. But once you understand that it is the BNST that is in charge of transformation blockages, obstacles, not the amygdala, then the whole navigation and the whole interaction with threat changes. Now we want discomfort in the process. I know it sounds insane the first time you hear it, but think about it this way. A certain degree of emotional discomfort creates motivation, engages the limbic system. I will say, elation and excitement also engages the limbic system. But try to keep your coaching client elated and, engaged in that sense through the coaching sessions all the time. It's hard. It's harder to sustain. So we're not against joy and happiness. We're not intentionally designed to focus on discomfort, but a certain degree of emotional discomfort is actually useful because it engages the limbic system. How you create the right degree, the right kind of emotional discomfort is a big question, but it's definitely invited into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Any other thoughts?
Thanks so. It's the first time I also hear about BNST, and I saw that you mentioned it's built on our lived experience. So my question is, and again, I apologize if it completely doesn't make any sense. How can we fix it if we haven't had lived experience? I mean, can we fix it based on a vision or imaginative desired experience, or I mean, how does it work?
Just to rephrase your question, just so that I'm sure, I'm just going to play it back to you. How do we create these lived experiences to facilitate transformation? And can we do it with visualization or other things that are not actual experience, right? Is that you're asking?
Exactly. I mean, it's this fact that there aren't in the pool of lived experience at the client, they may not have the ones that need to be in place in order to fix this road.
Brilliant. Oh, okay, so those are two questions actually. So one is a question of expediting, and the second is a question of the right kind of reinforcement, right? So two different questions. So in the brain, these are two different questions I'm saying, two different functions. So the first is we're very lucky. We're very, very, very lucky because the limbic system isn't concerned with what's actually going on. Your dreams go into your limbic system. Your certain types of visualization, so you kind of have to be careful because there's certain things that go into the limbic system and certain things that don't. But if you create it as an experience, if you create a visualization as an experience that the brain registers as an experience, then it is going to activate the limbic system. So you can sit in a coaching room, or for that matter, you can read a book, you can watch a TV show, all of those count as experiences. If you're engaged in the right way, all of those are, and that the reason this is so important is because it expedites the transformation process. If I waited, let's say you need to practice, you are you constantly dismiss yourself. And I want you to practice not doing that, right? So in a particular situation, you dismiss yourself. Well, if I need to sit here as a coach and you and we need to wait for opportunities when you finally feel that you're self-dismissing, and then we get to analyze it or whatever else we're doing with it, that can take years. Can take years because the past reinforcement, sometimes we meet clients in their 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Sometimes later. They've had 50 years of reinforcing self-dismissal. So you're coming in now and you want to take 3 examples that you have to wait 3 months to, it's too long, right? Luckily, we can expedite that by creating more opportunities. We have to design them a very particular way. But once we design them that way, they expedite. Now, the question of constructive. Let's say I've waited a month for the client to have an experience related to being self-dismissive, and then they go, and in the moment of creating the experience, they already subconsciously attach the event that happened with meaning making that says, I should dismiss myself. Once they do that event not only doesn't help us, it actually adds to the 50 years of them reinforcing it the wrong way. So how do we break it down and make it constructive? Our job, and advanced applied neuroscience coaches are trained to do this. The mechanics, you're actually highlighting the mechanics of transformation with your question, which is that you need to create new events. And in the moment of creating the new events, you have to attach new meaning. When you do that, transformation will happen on its own. So there's 2 components, and literally, this is the mechanism of transformation. When you engage, you have to engage the limbic system correctly. There's other aspects of this that are very important, but that's it. That's the mechanism right there. So if you can do that, it's transformative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It actually blew my mind what you said, creating new event and then attaching new meaning. I'm having the epiphany. Thank you for putting this in such a simple way. Simple to say, difficult to to
Yes.
apply, but already gives a flavor of which direction it may go.
And Ruth, when is your next program starting?
So we have different offerings. So we have a cohort that starts at a set time. We have a self-paced option that people can start at any point. Any additional reflections on?
I'll just share that I'm thinking through the crossover between the neuroscience and what we're talking about here and the emerging science of adaptability as intelligence and also a system versus, a program or an experience. So I'm just twirling it all around in my mind about how these two work together.
Would you help me? Would you say that in a slightly different way?
So I don't know if people are familiar with kind of the movement that's coming. It's actually coming out of the UK. There's a company out there who's been doing probably 5 or so years validating an instrument that measures adaptability. And it has three sort of domains. One is the ability domain, and that's where things like grit, resilience, um, the ability to unlearn, those kind of skill sets live there. Then they have a domain of character. And it's like, how hopeful are you? Those, those types of kind of personal characteristics, which is really where I think the neuroscience probably anchors. And then they also assess the external environment, and it's particularly in the workplace. But, do you feel supported by the team around you in this context for coaching clients one-on-one that might not be dealing with workplace issues? Do they have a support network around them that they feel that is supporting them and cares about them? Do they feel what level of stress are they under? Is it optimal? Is it too low? Is it too high? So it's all around that environmental context, because without the right environment, no change happens. So that's what was coming up for me.
Okay. Got it. So interesting. Thank you. I'll just say a word about this real quick. So this is an organizational hat, easily, but actually also for individual coaching, all of these components are relevant. Even like when you say the external environment, you start talking about like, your team, your organization, your structure, your so on and so forth. Yes, okay, but also even for a family, even if you're married, now your spouse influences you, your children influence you, the work, the play, how many hours you work and so on. I mean, that those constructs exist also in individual coaching. And I think what's really, really important to understand from an advanced applied neuroscience point of view is that all of these components contribute to your ability to change, but also the way you interact with emotional discomfort contributes to how you deal with those factors. It's not one directional. So how I interact with emotional discomfort would define my resilience, but also if I change the way I interact with emotional discomfort, my resilience would grow. Same about my ability to unlearn, how hopeful I am, believe it or not, as well as how I interact with my external environment. Like, it's not a one-way street. This is very much a dynamic relationship. So it's important to understand, it's important to take that into account where we work with coaching clients, that their environment influences them. But it's also as important to understand that once we change the way people interact with emotional discomfort, we're also empowering them to change all those other aspects.
Would you be able to give a quick example of what you just said, the not one-way street? So the environment influences me in my decision making, but what's the other way around then?
So let's say that let's say that I'm married to a person. This is true. This is real. I'm married to a person who is very structured and has very, very high standards. And I grew up in a household where I was judged all the time and, constantly. So any sort of like judgment or telling me that this is the quote unquote right way to do triggers me. And this is the environment I live in. Now I come into coaching and we're working on whatever else, whatever else. Unless we work on the way I interact with emotional discomfort and I change that, my husband's whisperings in my ear, whether things he actually says or things that I've already expect he's going to say or whatever else, are now going to block me from changing. So the way I interact with emotional discomfort, if I become stronger and I become empowered, and then I can tune out a lot more of his noise and say, well, that's not part of my environment, darling. That's you. That's not me. That has nothing to do with me. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because it can be perceived threat. So like a resistance is not an actual threat, but it is a perceived threat for the client. I mean, I am resisting, let's say, to change. Okay, let's say I'm resisting to pursue my goal of opening a coaching business. Let's say that. Okay. So, you sense while you're coaching me, for example, that I'm resisting this. So I'm resisting it because in my mind, maybe I have this limiting belief that I cannot have a good coaching business unless I put a lot of effort. And if I put a lot of effort, I'm going to not be a good mom, for example. So in my mind, there's a conflict between the two. And so isn't that resistance?
So if we're talking about a woman who is trying to build a new coaching business, for example.
Yeah. Let's say she has a limiting belief that, work and success at work and success in being a mom don't go together. So it's either or. She has this type of thinking, let's say an either or type of thinking. So that limiting belief or that limiting way of thinking is creating kind of a, let's say, hesitation, if not fear, hesitation of pursuing that, but she's not aware of it because she doesn't know that there's this low grade emotion that's going on that's really stopping her from going. The same thing with procrastination, the same thing so they're all low grade emotions. And you're right, it makes sense when I thought about it. You're right, because they're not very intense. It's not like the amygdala hijack, because there's no way you're not going to notice that emotion. But these emotions, they can go unnoticed. If somebody is not really connected with themselves, they don't, notice their body or whatever. So they won't know that they're going through those emotions, and it's easy to miss them. We also miss them sometimes. It's not only the client. We also miss them sometimes because they're not so intense. When they become very intense, that's different. You can't but notice them. So yeah, I do understand. I really like that concept of, I guess these are all resistance.
Yeah, so thank you for reflecting on that. So just to highlight something really important, let's say that she has this kind of very kind of binary way of thinking about the world. It's either this or that. Either I succeed or I fail. Either, if that's her way of interacting with emotional discomfort, it's going to be true across many different situations, not just about the business.
Yeah, for sure, because that's a pattern. I mean, they usually are like that. So when people see black or white or, like two polarities, let's say. So yeah, this is their way they always see only two ways. It's either this or that.
Thank you. And from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, we're going to say that's the resistance. And forget about the business. Forget about the particular coaching question, whether she will or she won't, she build or she won't, whatever. Start talking about the pattern of this binary thinking. And if you resolve the binary thinking, as well as any other patterns she has underlying, it will unlock
help
her
her
ability.
everywhere.
Well, I like to reply to it, like a coaching perspective. The question comes up like, what is this person trying to protect? Because, that seems like a physiological response. There's so much on the line when you have that binary thinking, and it's so simplified. And then in the brain, I mean, you're the expert, not me. Like, what is happening in that emotive part of the brain? The resistance shows up in some of my clients in a very complex ways. It means that, as we work through different layers, and meaning, the layers of initial support, having them open up, working through their value system, which changes, then the beliefs is restructured and all that stuff, the resistance seems to kind of deepen or change, if you will. And, so the question that came up for me, it almost seemed like two different things were colliding internally, which, we might have a very particular model or theory of what resistance is. But then as we kind of go deep into the subconscious, a lot of stuff gets unworked. And even I've seen my own clients get kind of flummoxed, like, what the heck, And then they said they're going to do this stuff. They're excited about it. They come back and they're like, I just couldn't do it. And so, layer by layer, I'm, when they're letting me into places of vulnerability, I'm like, oh, okay, well, here we go. It's, we've got the value system, it's in imbalance. Oh my gosh, then we've got trauma here that's not being resolved. Oh no, then we've got ADHD. And it's just like months and months working through it. The resistant changes is like, what's the confluence? How does it all come together? Does resistance change, with the physiology, emotion, as well as, because we've got to try, we're helping them to realize the goals to transform, to create a different life and experience. So that's kind of like where I am in my headspace here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And it is like when we meet our clients, there is a great deal of complexity. Often, I mean, you mentioned trauma and, other things, and, there's just a lot of components, but even without it, we're all complex beings. So, it's like trying to decipher a universe, and then how do you know what to touch and what to support when everything's kind of activating, and whatever is activating can change. The emotional part of the brain is fascinating and complex. Many things are going on at the same time, to go back to what you said earlier. My Because of that, because I agree with you, because there's a lot going on, this domain, when you're talking about changing emotional response patterns to discomfort, to threat, when you start talking about those kinds of patterns, which are very difficult to change, if you don't have a really bright spotlight that focuses on one effort with the client, you're going to be all over the place. And if you start being all over the place, this pattern will either take you a really, really, really long time to change it, because there's other things pulling you in different directions, right? There's all kinds of things going on. So if you don't create focus on this particular challenge to change the way they interact with emotional discomfort, the subconscious is anyway associative. It's like a dream state. Like if you look at how the limbic system works, it's not an organized thinking zone. It's very associative, and one thing leads to another, and so you can lose the client like that. And as a result, it might take months, if not years, for you to actually change a pattern like this. And I'm not talking 3 months, I'm talking 10 months, a year, right? A long time before you can. In our work, because we're willing to say, not that this is not important, not that what you said is not important, but because we know that this is such a high priority and such a key to unlock everything else, that we're willing to say, for the time being, I'm only going to engage with you around the things that are going to support the transformation of this pattern for a time. As a result of that, it takes us 2 to 3 months to change a pattern like this, which is life altering. It's life altering. So while you are right, and I agree with you, there's a question of priorities that we don't have to buy into. You don't have to buy into. I'm just representing the advanced applied neuroscience perspective and why we're so, one-minded about this particular challenge, because it is in an ocean of other challenges, like you so wisely said earlier.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I agree with you as well, because, I understand that we're talking about changing one pattern and laser focusing on it and working on that. And it seems like the change, it's just drags on. It seems slow, and you got to keep returning the client and building this trust in the process that it's going to work. And then when they get that first inkling of a little success, you've got to be right there with them and saying, look, it is working. You did this yourself, and it can bring you a lot more success. Just trust yourself and keep doing the practices that we design right together in the coaching that they can do in their every day.
Yeah, and imagine now that little success happens after 2 or 3 months, and that it's not a little success. Imagine that they feel empowered and they feel like they had an amazing breakthrough in their life.
I am thinking about this model, and I found it very useful because I have been feeling like the amygdala fight, flight, freeze is limited, and also the work that you're talking about, the relationship with emotional discomfort as being a really crucial lever for change really resonates. And it resonates in my life as I think about it's almost like exposure therapy I've been giving myself, right, to different discomforts. And I happen to be ADHD, late diagnosed, right? And so I am very interested in the overlap between neurodivergence and this model that you've put forward. And I'm wondering if you have any materials around the overlap between those two.
Yeah. We had a workshop, I want to say last month or the month before, about neurodivergence. It's also on the YouTube channel, so I highly recommend you go look it up.
Thank you.
But also, whatever you're doing, just a nudge and a reminder that in addition to the narrative of what's getting in my way and what am I feeling, and that one of the focuses of your work with them is how they're interacting with emotional discomfort. Neurodiversity is complex in ways that we sometimes don't understand, in the sense that sometimes it actually is really helpful to be very direct about what the patterns are and not be gentle and not like dance around it, and just really identify it quickly, because these people they're misunderstood. First off, so I'm not talking about if you meet someone who's neurodivergent and they're 15, maybe they had a slightly different experience, but if you meet anyone neurodivergent who is 30 or older, there's a lot of pain and hurt that is very easily triggered. So if you are not very upfront, very quickly to say, okay, there's another asterisk in my head, why I'm saying it's kind of urgent to identify their way of interacting with emotional discomfort with neurodivergent people often. Also because some neurodivergent people, because of the way their brain works, they are impatient. They're more impatient. They have a stronger sense of urgency. There's other things going on just with their type of brain. So put all that together, and now your ability to identify their way of interacting with emotional discomfort up front and zoom in on that becomes magnified. What I said earlier about, you need to focus on that. Now it becomes 10 times more important. So now your skill level of how to negotiate that becomes much more needed. So imagine that because you're neurodivergent and it's hidden really, really well, but because you're neurodivergent, you have a lot of self-confidence issues. So you have challenges with just feeling good enough, feeling you belong, you're relevant. What you're going to do, especially if you're on the spectrum, potentially, is you're going to intensify your talents. So if I'm smart, if I'm highly intelligent, I'm going to depend on that heavily. And then it's going to be very hard for me when I don't succeed in something. Say that I fail a course, or that I'm not able to figure out a relationship or whatever. Now that is going to become a very big source of threat for me. And I want to figure that out. I want to figure that out with a great deal of urgency. So I don't want to talk about how I'm interacting with emotional discomfort. But if you don't resolve the fact, as a coach, if you don't figure out a way with this client to resolve how they're interacting with this self-judgment, they're going to constantly oscillate between I'm amazing, I don't need help, I'm great, hence I don't need to come to the sessions, I don't need to meet with you, I'm fine, thank you very much, to oh, everything is horrible, and while it's horrible, I just want to talk about what I suck at. And as a result, you don't get an opportunity to actually talk about their pattern of how they're interacting with emotional discomfort, which is what they really, really need.
So I am overcoming many of the things that you just spoke about. Thank you for the passion that you're bringing and the dedication. I can feel it in this container.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, Ruth, first of all, thank you so very much for being out there, existing, having linked up, and being so persistent in a very, very, very good way about inviting me to one of your sessions. This is the first one that I am finally participating in, and am so grateful. There is such a depth of wisdom, experience, observation right there. It's absolutely amazing. When I went through the workbook, and this is the first time I hear about BNST. I've never, amygdala kind of, I touched upon it. BNST was completely unknown to me. But this is the space which I am so interested in. But the first thing that kind of lit up in my mind is the memory of me going into a bookstore in New York, and right there, Barnes and Noble, I think it was, but on the book stand facing the door, which I entered through, was the book by Alan Watts, The Wisdom of Insecurity. And I've always been that kind of way myself, but there was never a name tag on it that is what it's called. But I looked at it and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I kind of was trying to explain to people, that can't you see that this is amazing? Can't you just step over the fear, just go out there, just do this. And this is one of the most inspiring books for me. And every time I get stuck, I open it up at a random place, and I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And I have to say, so I'm a huge admirer of Alan Watts, his voice and his voice. So his actual voice, but also like what he shared with this world. But what I want to say about that is the journey from insecurity that is terrifying to us to insecurity that we celebrate and we enjoy and we're excited about is a big part of what this work is about. How do you get someone who is, uncertainty or threat scares them to a place where they say, oh, I made a mistake. How exciting. What can we learn from this? So thank you for saying that. Thank you for, like I said, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing of yourself. At the end of the day, we're all here for our clients. The more we learn, the more we are evolving, the more we can support people to be happier, more fulfilled, more balanced, more empowered, all those things that are so, so important for every day. So I'm just grateful you're here, and I look forward to running into you soon, wherever the path finds us.